let's get some Latino psychologists in here to talk about this. You know, let's get an African American doctor. Let's get a woman doctor. My Mind Matters segment, which is mental health, I make sure I've brought in Black women psychologists, Dr. So-and-so, so because they don't know who these people are, but we do.
Yeah.
Bring that to the table. Bring it up in the meetings. Pitch it, because they're not going to. That is on us.
Yeah.
That is something that we carry that no one else carries.
And that's what Sia said earlier. I think a lot of times people will complain about media, and I get it. You don't like the news, that's fine too. A lot of us don't. It's a lot going on, but we didn't get into these spaces just to be on TV.
Correct.
We got into these spaces to create change. We got into these spaces. There have been times I got into not full-fledged arguments, but I'd be like, no, actually, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Actually, you need to be careful of this. And even when it comes to, yes, being on the desk versus being a reporter who is outside, basically everybody who you see outside is a reporter out in the field, and then anchors are the ones that sit behind the desk or in the studio the whole time. But I tell people there's power and influence in each of those roles.
Correct.
Especially behind the scenes. I'm always, when we're hiring, I'm always out here looking for people because there's more influence even being a producer, being behind the scenes. You're the one creating the show.
Yes.
But that's how, when you want to say, I want things to change, that's how they're going to change. You got to infiltrate these spaces and get into these positions to say, okay, then you can be the ones to say, because I'm very vocal in my newsroom about what we're covering, how we're covering it, the impact that it has on the people that we're talking to, and just making everybody aware of that. Because yes, you came into journalism for whatever reason, but you also maybe came in and I need to have the facts, I need to have this, but you forget. I tell people all the time, the pandemic taught us two things: don't mess with people's money, and you need to make sure your mind is right. Yeah. And with those two things, that's how news has changed since the pandemic, on how we cover things and what we're covering. All that has shifted.
Yeah. How did, and listening to you, Shannon, and talking about just speaking up and going into the business for change, was it a defining moment when you all found your voice to be able to speak up in the newsroom?
Yes.
Yes.
It took years.
Yeah.
Do you have one defining moment that you can share that actually said, you know what, this is it. I'm tired of seeing it this way. This is how, why I'm speaking up.
When I was in Buffalo years ago, I was working on the weekends. I was a weekend reporter. And our on-call manager was like, oh, it was like maybe May. It was starting to get warm outside. And, the age-old, sun's out, guns out, everybody's getting shot. No, that wasn't. That's what they were kind of trying to do that story with, because there was a shooting, and I think there may have been 2 shootings in a weekend. And I told her, I said, respectfully, I'm not doing that. And I said, here's why. I have spoken to peaceful organizations. I talk to police all the time. That's not the case. So I'm not going to frame that narrative that that's what I'm saying. And I told her, I said, respectfully, I'm actually not going to do that. We can do a story about XYZ and here, but I'm not about to create that. That's actually not true. Here's why. I spoke to these officers can speak to that. This peaceful organization that I speak to all the time can speak to that. Because I told her, do you think that people, that would mean that people aren't getting shot in the wintertime? It's violence all the time. So that's not the narrative that really is correct. And we have to be careful on how we're saying that. And I remember she respected it and was like, okay, well, what else are we going to do? And I said, here's another, this is what else we can do. Because if you're going to say no, you also got to have another solution.
You got to bring another alternative. You do.
You can't just be like, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. You got to be like, no, I can do something else. Here's what I have.
True. That is so true. When I did my podcast, Voices for Change, at this previous station I used to work for, and I did a thing on being a Black journalist during the time of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, because I felt that no one was being sensitive to the Black media, to the Black reporters that are going out, to the riot that happened in downtown Cleveland, and that one of my reporters was called the N-word while she was out on her morning shot. That no one's thinking about that this isn't just a story to us, this is our lives. And I asked, could I do this podcast? And I want to do it, I want to interview, I'm gonna have all the Black journalists and producers that's working in this newsroom, and we're gonna tell you our story. We're gonna tell you how we really feel. That was me stepping up, saying something that was very personal to me, and I was feeling all my stuff, but doing a podcast and being able to get that across, that these are things that y'all aren't paying attention to. You are assigning us a story, but this story is not just a story to us, it's our lives. And I was so grateful that they allowed us to tell what we were feeling and how we were feeling, how I was resenting. I'm a mother of a Black son. I got to go home and have a conversation with him about what's happening. So we were allowed to do that in the podcast. It actually won an Edward R. Murrow Award, which I was very happy for. But that was stepping up. That was stepping out of the comfort zone.